Welcome to the third installment on the Essential Equipment videos. This one is for frames and foundation choices. When you're choosing frames, you basically have two options. One of them is the wooden and the other is plastic.
And if you choose wooden, you could assemble it yourself, or you could just buy it pre-assembled for a little extra charge. The simplest frame choice is the plastic frame. These come in black or white. They are plastic one-piece frames coated with a heavy coating of beeswax, which helps the bees get started drawing out comb. That means creating comb. So you pull this right out of your box when you receive it and put it into your hive. Your second choice, which is sort of middle of the road for difficulty, the first one being the simplest, is a wooden frame with plastic foundation in it. This one happens to have white plastic foundation in it, but black is also available. Again, the plastic foundation is coated with beeswax. Later in the video, I'm going to show you how to pop that foundation into the wooden frame. The third choice is wooden frames with beeswax foundation in them. The beeswax foundation is a very thin sheet of wax imprinted with hexagons. These hexagons are the bases of the cells that the bees will then create by adding wax from their bodies and drawing out the wax to make honeycomb on each side of the foundation. And that's the same thing that they do with the other types of foundation as well. These have hexagons printed on them, and the bees start their cells and build comb on each side. With the wooden frames with wired waxed foundation in them, there is a little bit more detail and effort to putting them together. And I'll show you that as well in this video. So your three choices are a one-piece plastic frame, which includes foundation. There's nothing to assemble. A wooden frame with plastic foundation, and both the first and second choices there have beeswax on the plastic foundation. The third choice is a wooden frame with beeswax foundation. Of course, if you chose any of the wooden ones, you could get it assembled or you could assemble it yourself.
Use glue first and then nail everything together. Tight bond wood glue or any kind of wood glue is good, and put enough in so that it squishes out the cracks. Then you know that all the surfaces were covered with glue.
The bees like all of these kinds just fine. As long as your colony is strong and populous, and there is nectar or sugar syrup to drink, they will create comb on any of these types of foundation and frames. So let me show you some details. Let's put some plastic foundation into wooden frames.
If you chose the wooden frames and plastic foundation, this is what you do. Hold your frame by the top bar, then flip it over and grab that top bar. See the groove in the middle? We're going to put the foundation into that groove. Now we're going to bend the foundation and force it into the groove in the bottom bar. So I put it against my stomach, and then I just kind of flex it, and you can hear it go pop, and it popped into the bottom bar. And then I like to kind of make sure that it wiggles left and right, and that assures me that it is in both of those grooves all the way across. For the medium-sized frames and plastic foundation, it's a little bit harder because there's only about 5 or 6 inches, and the plastic is not so bendable because it's shorter. But we'll do it the same way. Remember the groove in the top bar. We're going to put the foundation into that groove in the thicker piece of wood, which we're calling the top bar, because when it's in the hive, it hangs from this bar inside the box. The bottom bar also has a groove. So we're going to put the foundation into the top bar first, and then I grab it on the bottom bar and just flex that foundation. You can see it's a little harder, but we're going to get it in there.
Now let's put wax foundation into a frame.
This is called a wedge top frame. The top bar has what we call a wedge, which is a cut that's done almost all the way through, but not quite. And then the customer who's going to put their foundation in cracks that wedge out of there and keeps it for later to put back in after the foundation is in. So let me show you how to do that with crimp wire foundation. When you buy crimp wire foundation, it usually comes in bundles of 10 wrapped up in paper, and also it has had wires embedded in it which have these little hooks at one end. Can you see those hooks? This end has no hook. The side with the hooks goes by the top bar of your frame. So what I do is I stand it up and let gravity help me to drop that foundation sheet into the slot in the bottom bar. And I'll lay it back down so that the hooks are resting in this slot there. And it's settled into that L-shaped spot up there where the wedge came out. And now is when you take your wedge and put it back in, and then you would take some very tiny nails or stapler and drive them in through that wedge into the top bar. And the best way to do that is to turn it over, and if you're using a staple gun, probably 3 staples straight down through that would be fine. And if you're using a hammer and nails, I recommend using the smallest hammer you can get so you have more control over it with these tiny little movements and the tiny nails. Try not to tear your foundation while you're doing this. And like I said with the staples, probably only 3 is necessary. The next thing you want to do when you're done putting the wedge in is put some support pins right through these 4 holes at the end. They'll come in a little bag and they basically just look like little silver clothespins.
Push the support pins in with your thumb and make sure the foundation sets into the split in the pins.
Oops, I missed one up here. Both pieces went on one side of the wax. So I'll just tug that out a little ways and reseat it. And this is definitely the easiest way to support your foundation. There's other ways, which are the support rods or wires, but I think that support pins are sufficient as long as after you build your equipment, you keep your frames hanging vertically in the boxes the way they should be. Always keep frames, whether it's comb or foundation, hanging vertically in the boxes. And after the bees get it, they will quickly attach this, fill in those gaps, and attach the foundation to all of these edges of the frame and draw out more comb, creating the hexagonal cells of beeswax, and the whole thing will be much stronger. It's during this stage where it's the most fragile, and it just takes a little care to keep it from being busted or cracked. Instead of using any of these foundations and waiting for bees to draw out beeswax comb on them, you could choose Better Comb. Better Comb is a completely drawn comb made out of food-grade virgin synthetic wax, similar in composition to beeswax. Aside from the cost or ease of assembly, is there any reason to choose wood frames over plastic frames or wax foundation over plastic wax-coated foundation? A lot of it's personal preference. As you can see here, our hives have become kind of a mix of wood and plastic frames, and we also had both kinds of foundation in these frames, and the bees built comb very nicely on both kinds. The frames themselves have a few differences. Plastic frames lift up and out of the hives a little bit easier than wood frames. Wood frames are a little stiffer than plastic frames, and some people like that better when they're prying them. Some people say that wax foundation might break apart and the comb might break out of the frame when you're harvesting, but I have not found that to be the case when the foundation has had good support pins at the ends. Why don't you try getting both kinds and share an order with a friend, and you can each split it up and see what you think of all the different kinds.